The National Association of Realtors just pulled one over, settled a massive commission lawsuit. And many are heralding this as a landmark decision that will change the face of real estate forever. But is it actually going to change the way that real estate is sold? It probably won't, and I have really good evidence to support that theory. But before we get into it, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button so more people like you can see this video. And if you want to thrive financially, this is definitely the place for you. So make sure you turn on that notification bell as well. Okay, so let's jump into this. I want to start by showing you the details of this settlement. And these are the highlights. There's other things associated with this, but this is the part that really matters to consumers. And the first piece of this settlement is the ability to maintain cooperative compensation. This is a massive, massive win for the National Association of Realtors. So what cooperative compensation is the ability for sellers to offer the buyer's agent compensation when buying a home. What the lawsuit had hoped to have happen was a decoupling of who pays for what. So in other words, what they were trying to get was a scenario or a situation or rules where the sellers pay the seller's agent and the buyers pay the buyer's agents. That didn't happen. NAR was able to protect the cooperative compensation abilities that it currently has, which for the most part means that not much is going to change. What is going to change, however, is that all commissions now need to be negotiated off the MLS. And more specifically, it is now going to be prohibited for offers of compensation to be posted on the MLS system. So a seller can't post on the MLS that they're offering 3% compensation to a buyer's agent. Now, that's just going to simply change the conversation around this. When a buyer's agent goes to book a showing on a property, more than likely part of that booking is now going to be asking what the compensation is for the buyer's agent. And the problem with that, of course, is that more often than not, there's going to have to be compensation offered by the seller in order for a buyer to A, want to see the property and B, actually buy the property. Now, in a best case scenario, you're going to have buyers who want to buy a property that maybe isn't offering compensation, negotiating into the contract that compensation for various reasons, including the ability to have it included in financing, which is going to be a major sticking point, especially given how high housing prices are and given the fact that most buyers, or many buyers, I guess I should say, are strapped for cash to begin with, making it very hard for them to pay their real estate agents to go out and show them homes and negotiate contracts on their behalf. And I'll get to a little bit more about representation in a minute. But the primary thing that this lawsuit was trying to prevent was a practice called steering, which is the process of having a buyer's agent not want to show a property or encouraging a buyer not to look at a property because there was no compensation being offered. And this next piece, which is the buyer must enter into an agreement with members of the National Association of Realtors if they belong, is going to be the sticking point here, because before a buyer is going to be able to see a property, they're going to have to agree to a relationship agreement with the real estate agents. Now, this already exists in many places, including in some parts of Canada. And what happens here is that the standard compensation for a buyer's agent is 2.5% or 3%, which means if the seller is not willing to pay that, the buyer's going to have to pay for it out of pocket. So in the scenario that they're trying to prevent, which is steering, the new thing is going to be that buyers are going to look at properties and go, is the seller paying my agent? And if they are, fine. But if they aren't, the buyer is going to be faced with having to pay the agent themselves, which is going to make them less likely to buy the home. So instead of being steered from one property to the other, it's simply going to set up a market where buyers are just not going to be willing to pay the real estate agent, and therefore they're going to choose not to purchase properties if there are other similar ones available that have a buyer's agent payment in part of the agreement. That will mostly be negotiated going forward in the actual purchase and sale process. Now, all of these rules, all of these things that are going to be enacted from the settlement are going to be effective mid-July. But one thing to keep in mind here is that the Department of Justice still needs to sign off on this. And there's nothing to suggest that they won't. But if they start to see that this is really just an agreement to keep things the same with a couple of minor rule changes, there may be more to come. My guess, though, is that there probably won't be. Now, I want to talk next about the problems with this whole agreement, because there are many problems, especially when you look at the desired outcome of the plaintiffs versus the desired outcomes of NAR. And believe me, NAR got what they were hoping for, and the $416 or $18 million settlement is really a small price to pay to continue to be able to do business the way that they've been doing it. And I want to start by talking first about this no decoupling piece, because had decoupling been made law in the United States, this would have actually changed the landscape of real estate forever, because it would have meant that there would be no other option than for buyers to pay the real estate agents. Now, I'm guessing that why this was agreed to is that if you were actually create that scenario where buyers had to pay realtors, and it would have a whole bunch of other adverse side effects, including the possibility of buyers not actually getting representation. And one thing to keep in mind here is that the MLS rules as they exist today were founded in 1990. And the whole reason that they were put into place was to protect buyers, and more specifically, to make sure that they had proper representation. So not having the decoupling has two side effects. One, it makes it so not much has changed. But two, it also creates a scenario where people are still going to be encouraged to have representation. And that leads us to our next piece on representation and why that is so important. Many people believe that sellers agents do more to sell a house and therefore should be compensated more. But the reality is that isn't necessarily true. Yes, there's marketing expenses involved in selling a home, which, by the way, are very much a product of recent times. The marketing costs associated with selling a home in the 1990s, when the MLS rules were put into place, were considerably less than they are today, at least relative to the commission amount. But when it comes to the buyer side of a transaction, it's not really the gas that goes into the car or the time that people are paying for. What a buyer is actually paying for is representation. The ability to have somebody who knows the things that they don't know represent them and protect them. And there's many ways that buyer's agents do this. Obviously, the first is by negotiating the contract, but they also go one step further by making sure that things like home inspections are put into place and financing is put into place, and things are done in a way that isn't going to put the buyer in breach of contract, or in addition to that, also make sure that the buyer doesn't buy a property that is going to end up costing them tens of thousands of dollars somewhere down the road because it has inherent issues or is in a bad location, or because they just got duped by a seller's agent when they didn't have anybody representing them. So in my mind, at least, it's more important to have proper representation on the buyer side from an experienced real estate agent, because the proper representation is actually the thing that is going to potentially save you from making massive mistakes that cost you a significant amount of money. So on the seller side, you're paying for marketing. On the buyer side, you're very much paying for representation. And had the decoupling piece gone into place, the tendency to have proper representation would have went away, and this could have actually ended up costing people significantly more money than the amount that they saved by having a buyer's agent be paid. Now, one of the potential side effects of this whole thing is that consumers misrepresent what this ruling means and think that it is a good idea to go and purchase the property directly from the seller's agent, forgoing any representation as the buyer, and therefore get duped out of a significant amount of money from the seller's agent, whose only job is to get as much money for that property as humanly possible because they represent that seller. And this leads us into the next piece of the conversation, which is the ludicrous belief, especially from many pundits and experts who probably aren't actually that deeply involved in the real estate industry, who believe that this is going to save people millions and millions of dollars, or consumers millions and millions of dollars. I've seen estimates up to $30 million per year. Well, the reality is home prices and commissions probably aren't going to go down because A, the cooperative compensation model is still going to exist, which means that real estate agents can pretty much agree in the market what the going compensation is. And then on top of that, home prices are not going to decrease, especially when you consider the fact that home prices don't go down because commissions go down. The market price for a property is the market price for a property, and the belief that changing the compensation of real estate agents is going to change those values is absolutely absurd. In fact, it could have the exact opposite effect. If buyers start going in unrepresented, thinking that they're going to get a deal because they don't have to pay commissions, well, guess what? Those selling agents who are professionals are probably going to get a little bit more money for those properties, and home prices could actually go up. If there is any effect on home prices, at least to the downside, it's going to be negligible. So the reality here is that this lawsuit is probably going to change nothing other than the process for having the conversation around compensation. Yes, there will be people that come in off the heels of this lawsuit and try to disrupt the market, but for the most part, real estate has been done the way it's being done for decades and decades and decades. And to think that this lawsuit, other than just changing a couple of minor rules, is going to change the way that realtors behave is, well, ludicrous. So as a consumer, it's important for you to know that as a seller, you're probably still going to have to offer compensation to the buyer's agent. As a buyer, if you purchase a property where compensation isn't going to be offered to your agent, you're either going to have to negotiate it into the contract or you're going to have to pay for it out of pocket. And don't even think about going in and buying a property unrepresented, because those sellers' agents are definitely going to be more informed than you. And don't think for a second that buying a house is an easy thing, even though it seems easy because everyone for the last 50 years has had help doing it. You have to be aware of the fact that having good representation is worth its weight in gold. Now, the thing that I do hope changes is that buyers change the way that they look at who represents them. I hope that buyers start looking for more experienced agents, knowing that they are worth every single penny and that you get what you pay for. And I certainly hope that buyers start looking first and foremost for somebody that they can trust when they start looking at houses. And by the way, no matter where you are in North America, if you need help finding a real estate agent, we can help you. Just go to the link in the description below and we'd be happy to set you up with somebody in a market that we know is going to have your best interests at heart. Oh, and if you want to know more about things that are happening in the US real estate market, make sure you check out this video right here.